Hey, world history students. Today we're going to continue talking about European imperialism. We've talked about it in Africa. We talked about those main causes. Make sure you know economically, the Industrial Revolution, you know about nationalism, competition with European powers, uh, Christianization, trying to convert people, and then the social Darwinism aspect where they felt like it was white man's burden to come in and civilize the rest of the world because they were somehow superior. But anyway, we're going to talk about more than just Africa. We're going to talk about Asia and European imperialism today. All right, let's take a look here. We're going to talk specifically about India, China. Notice they are technically independent here. And we're going to talk about the Middle East. All right, let's start with India because India was considered the favorite colony or the crown jewel of the British Empire. It's most productive. You can see all of these great products here: cotton, silk, spices, rice, tea, sugarcane, coffee, all great things that Europeans love. And they use those in the factories to create goods that we sell right back to India and make even more money. Uh, you know, India was seen as a very useful colony because of those different things they produce. And the British, in order to keep this production going and make sure there were no problems, they instituted a sepoy control. Sepoys were Indian, and they were police or soldiers that were put in place by the British, and they controlled the rest of the population. And because they were Indian, people were more likely to listen to them. It seemed like it was our own people ruling, but really they were taking orders from the British. They were seen as a high up position that you could rise up to be one day, and they were given a great deal of respect. These sepoys were. And so that worked pretty well for a long period of time. And then after a while, Indians are going to start to realize, hey, maybe we can make some of these textiles ourselves. We're going to make the shirt, we're going to grow the cotton, and we're going to set up factories here and make our own shirts. That'd be great, right? British say, absolutely not. We're going to make the textiles back in Britain. We're going to take your cotton at a very cheap price, make it ourselves, and sell it right back to you, even though you could do it yourself. Because we want to make money, and we don't really care how much money you make. We were here first, basically, type of mentality. And so textile factories were outlawed in India. It's going to lead to a couple of uprisings, notably the Sepoy Mutiny, where these guys here, the Sepoys, start to rebel and attack back, revolt against the British Army. Unfortunately for them and the Indians, this did not end very well. They can't compete with the British Army. It's the greatest in the world at the time. They have all that great technology we talked about last section and in the Industrial Revolution. Not a great situation there. Let's take a look at what that means for India. Some of the good things that happened because of British rule and set up there is, number one, they got British educational system established. A lot more people can now read and write, especially in English. They built a railroad system to carry all these crops from the center of India to the coast so they could ship it back to Britain. And we're going to see the jobs increase greatly. All right, there's going to be a lot of people involved in the farming of these different crops. However, we're not going to see anybody employed in industry jobs or factories that would be making a little bit more money. So they were very basic jobs, and Indians grew to resent them. This is what's going to happen here. Indians are going to become very nationalistic, think, hey, we can produce these things ourselves. I don't really like this British rule system. We could be making a whole lot more money without you. We know how to do it. We can figure it out. And so, Indians are going to start to speak out and become more and more vocal. But it's not going to be until a little bit later on, after World War I and World War II, that they would start to get their independence. And we'll talk about how that happens a little bit later on. But they're starting to resent the British and their rule. All right, so here's a map of India, how it looked at the time. It's a little bit larger than it is today because it includes Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Myanmar today as well. All right, moving on. China. China was a huge market. Obviously, they have a large population, and they produce a lot of great things that Europeans like: tea, silk, porcelain, and others, of course. Other raw materials they had there as well. During this time, they were ruled by a dynasty system, very similar to a monarchy, where it's hereditary rule, sons, daughters take over, and they were a very productive market that they could not only take items from, but they could also sell their European goods there as well. They could sell their textiles and manufactured goods there that they made in the factories to China. One of the things they like to sell to the Chinese especially was the British opium trade. Opium, if you may or may not know, is a drug, very addictive drug used today to make heroin. And it was sold to the Chinese at a very high rate. People became very addicted, and some bad social issues followed. So the Qing dynasty wanted to outlaw the opium trade. Britain said, "Oh no, we make a lot of money doing this. We're not going to let you stop us from selling opium." And so the Opium War ensues in 1840. There are many other names for it, but I like Opium War. Right, 1840, of course, as you see as a trend here, when you try to rebel against Britain during their industrialized time period, they're going to put you down. They're just too strong at this time. So they forced China to open up the trade to opium and others. Other Europeans and actually the U.S. is going to try to get a piece of that pie after they open up their trade, and they all take a little chunk out of China. And you can kind of see this depicted here in this picture. You got your Chinese guy here that does not want this to happen, but you can see England and Germany and France and Japan and others are trying to carve up China like a pie, and they want to take one of those spheres of influence where they can trade and sell their goods in China and make some money. And so this really weakened China. They were not industrialized yet like the US or Europe was, and so they couldn't do much about it. Later on in 1900, there was going to be a group of Chinese that do not like this system, known as the Boxers. They're going to try to rebel. See why we call it the Boxer Rebellion. And they're going to try to fight off all these colonial powers that we see mentioned here. Unfortunately for them, Britain, Russia, France, Japan, Germany, the United States, Austria, Hungary, and Italy are all going to join together and put down the rebellion. So they didn't really stand a chance because all these are industrialized nations, very advanced weapons and things of that nature. So they punished the rebels. They forced them to be executed. And China is going to still be in a state of oppression until we're going to see the Chinese Communist Revolution later on. All right, moving on to the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire controlled most of the territory for a long period of time up until World War I. We're going to see they're going to slowly decline and give up this land to Europeans in just a bit. So this Middle East area is very nutrient and resource rich. It has oil, which is the number one thing now that everybody wants, especially after World War I, to fuel automobiles and planes and other tanks and things like that. So after the Ottoman Empire collapses, they lose World War I. And they lose the fight to Britain and France. So Britain and France decide, hey, let's carve up the Ottoman Empire. We'll take half, you take half. This is what it looked like. France gets Lebanon and Syria. Britain gets Palestine, Jordan, and Iraq. And it all works out pretty well for them there. Not only that, they took their Egyptian land here and they dug the Suez Canal through Egypt, which made it much faster to ship from Europe to Asia. If you know anything about it, instead of going all the way around Africa here, now you could go through this little narrow gap that they dug a canal through and go squeak through here and go straight over to India and Asia and the rest of it. It's very profitable, number one, because anyone that goes by this canal has to pay a tax. All right, so that brings in more money. And now Britain takes control of that by 1870. So they take control of the Suez Canal and all of Egypt, and that's very profitable for them. So Britain gets even richer, of course. All right, now there's going to be some conflict over one of the countries there. I mentioned Palestine earlier. This is the holy land for a couple different religions, namely Christianity, but also the Jewish population and Muslims all claim this land to be holy. All right, this is the modern day area of Jerusalem. Today it's Israel. And during that time, it was still controlled by the Muslims. The Muslims had moved in there after the Jews had been kicked out originally. The Jews were the original inhabitants there. And during the Roman Empire days in 66 AD, they got kicked out for rebelling against the Roman Empire and forced to live and spread out throughout the world, namely in Europe, other parts of Asia as well. And so the Muslims move in and they find it to be their holy land. We're going to see their prophet comes there as well. And so now they live here and claim this to be their land. Now we have a problem where both people want to start living there. We're going to see the Zionist movement kick up. That's the movement for Jews in Europe to move back to Palestine because of the anti-Semitism, this hatred of Jews that's spreading around Europe during this time period. But now they start moving back, and now the Muslims dislike this system. So there's going to be a growing conflict there between the Jews and the Palestinians the Muslims there, that we'll talk more about later on.